We are going to move on to the work scope updates. We'll start the work scope updates with a presentation by Madeline Feltis on RC 1.3 oxidation behavior and HTGR TRISO fuel materials.
Good afternoon, everyone. Perhaps we are lucky that we're putting in this new paragraph for the solicitation, because without the letters of intent, folks might be a little bit confused as to what we're asking for. So I will go through this and try to make it clear what sort of experiments we want and what we don't want. And again, my name is Madeline Feltis. I work in the Office of Nuclear Energy, and I am the TRISO Fuels Program Manager. Our solicitation is in the program supporting area. It's under Materials for Advanced Reactor Technologies, RC1. And our particular paragraph is Oxidation Behavior of Gas-Cooled Reactor TRISO Fuels, number RC 1.3. Okay, so. There we go. First of all, on the NEOP only, not NSUF or NEED or other ones, we have it so that we have to have it led by university. We would provide maximum funding up to $800,000 up to 3 years. For those of you who are not familiar with TRISO fuels, I'm going to go over the little diagram on the right-hand side of my screen. TRISO fuel is made up of very small kernels, about 400 microns. We coat them with a porous carbon layer known as the buffer, and then we use a very high density pyrolytic carbon and then silicon carbide that acts as the containment for the fission products, and then another pyrolytic carbon layer. So these fuel particles act as their own containment. They can either be put into compacts, and you'll see that on the side, and into fuel blocks. The compacts hold the particles together with something that is called matrix, which is a graphitic material. It has some resins, and that's what we mean by matrix. The alternative shape of these are in pebbles, where we have a fuel region where we use the same matrix, and then we have an unfueled zone that is also made up of matrix, and they're made into 60 millimeter fuel spheres. They're about the size of a tennis ball. So why are we trying to get oxidation behavior? Well, gas-cooled reactors use pure helium as the coolant, but sometimes we can get some oxidants, such as air, moisture, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide may be present during normal operations, and there are strict limits on that. If the reactor system uses a Rankine cycle with a steam generator, if there's a tube leak, we could have a lot of moisture entering into the helium coolant and into the reactor core, which basically will eat up the graphite. Air can also be introduced during some accidents, namely a depressurization of a helium coolant loop from a coolant line break. So we need to understand the effects of these oxidants, air, moisture, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, on the TRISO fuel, so that we can understand what's happening with the fuel itself and how fission products may be transported through the reactor system. So fuel particle compact matrix oxidation experimental data is what we need here. Okay? So our proposals are geared towards having experimentally driven applications. We want to test the moisture oxidation of graphitic matrix and then air and moisture in the silicon carbide layer in what is known in the chemical transition regime from passive to active. We use the most prototypical available materials. We have unirradiated and irradiated TRISO that you can request, or you can use surrogates. We will work with you on that. And we emphasize that we want carefully designed separate effects experiments that can be used to compare with current, future, or developmental models for oxidation. The idea here is that we can use these to simulate moisture or air ingress accidents and predict the partial pressures of the oxidants that are transported to the particles themselves. So for instance, if we have a lot of moisture coming in, the graphite blocks could be attacked, which would mean that those compacts, those things that look like the chalk, the sizes of your finger, that would be attacked, and eventually it could make its way to the silicon carbide. I stress very much that proposal must not be focused on developing computational models only, or correlations with previous results, or doing ab initio, or just sort of chemical equilibrium models. We really want new experiments. So we want you to have proposals that consider the effect of irradiated silicon carbide and matrix properties to use as specimens. We want you to focus, of course, on experiments. We want you to use realistic ranges for the gas-cooled reactor, gas flows, and things like that. We want you to provide data about the level of the silicon carbide layer damage that could happen during an air or moisture ingress. And this is important because we will be doing integral tests with our advanced gas reactor experiments that we have. We have furnace tests, and we will have a large furnace that's being developed now, and your information will be helpful in developing that furnace too. We want you to provide useful information for that transition to active to passive and back again, passive to active oxidation for the CVD that's inside that TRISO particle. So what are the temperatures of interest? 1,000 degrees C up to 1,600 degrees C. And we chose the 1,600 degrees C because that's the depressurization loss of coolant accident. That's the highest temperature we would see in our gas reactor designs. And to use various atmospheres and different partial pressures. So you can do this as a separate effects test and do a parametric study within these ranges. But please do not repeat earlier tests that have already been performed with NEOP grants or under the Advanced Reactor Technology, the TRISO, or the graphite programs. And you'll see at the bottom of this slide, I have the website addresses so that you can look these up. You can search for TRISO in the names of the NEUP proposals over the last few years. It's almost like a decade, even back to NERI, we've had some. And the Advanced Reactor Technologies is where the TRISO fuels work is done. So you can go there. There's actually a specific tab that goes to the TRISO fuels area. So you can actually see reports about tests that have been done. So I've given you 4 types of tests that have already been done. Oxidation of graphite only, namely with the blocks, the prismatic blocks, has already been done. So please don't confuse the graphite blocks as matrix material. We've already done it for the block material. Previous fuel matrix tests have been done for different graphite tests, and we've done it for conditions in air, concentrate there on the moisture. We've had recent tests where we've had very small flat plates of non-uranium bearing material, and we've done some high temperature, high steam or air partial pressures. That has been done at Oak Ridge. So please be careful not to just put in for that only. If you need to do some of those tests just to check your equipment, that will be fine, but we can use those results we already have as benchmarks. And again, oxidation in air at high oxidant partial pressures and high temperatures have been done. We would like you to do it specifically in the 1,000 to 1,600 degrees Celsius in the transition range. So what kinds of proposals could you do? I give this figure at the bottom where we have the kernel. It's basically, obviously not to scale, but there's different ways that fission products can be released. There's heavy metal contamination that might be picked up as we compact. You know, a particle might be broken and we might pick up some tramp uranium. We have contamination that can happen inside the block as well. But the main thing here is that we have different ways of having fission products move and be transported back and forth into the system. So water ingress, air ingress, primary coolant helium leaks leave our particles vulnerable to corrosion. So if you can do separate effects tests with air moisture ingress oxidation that have not been done so far, and for instance, oxidation of fuel particles and matrix materials in water vapor with different oxidant partial pressures, and if you could determine reaction kinetic parameters behaviors, that would be great. We would like you also possibly to look at the fuel matrix burn off rate in these conditions and the reaction kinetic effects. You know, the actual calculation of the rates versus temperature versus pressures would be very useful. Again, oxidation of the silicon carbide layer at lower oxidant air and moisture partial pressures in that transition regime, and then matrix oxidation under varying moisture and vapor conditions. So I wanted to give you some ideas of what you could propose. Your proposal may be in situ at your university laboratory. You can use surrogate and non-radioactive specimens and materials experiments. First of all, we don't want to contaminate any of your laboratories with radioactive particles, and we certainly don't want to have any graduate students or undergraduate students picking up contamination or dose. Okay. We would like you to demonstrate experiments and test rig configurations that could be practical for using within radioactive hot cells. And the idea here is if your university does have a fixed glove box or a hot cell capability, then you could do your tests at your own hot cells. But the idea here is that you could come in later and propose an NSUF only to demonstrate this technique on our highly irradiated TRISO particles. Again, we have specimens from the gas reactor TRISO fuel program and the graphite creep tests. We have had matrix only irradiated in the graphite tests. And we have specimens that have been put together already as part of NSUF and K's irradiations for hot cell SEM, TEM, and FIB. So those specimens could be made available. So I would suggest that you work with the HTGR TRISO program staff to get the appropriated irradiated and unirradiated specimens. We do have archived TRISO fuel archived not only at Idaho National Lab, but also at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. If you were to decide to irradiate something in your own TRIGA, your research reactor, that might be useful, but it would take more than 3 years to get an adequate dose. So please avail yourself of our specimens. If you would like to interact with gas-cooled reactor fuel vendors and reactor designers about their system requirements, that would be very much encouraged. That means you could ask some questions like from Areva, from X Energy, etc. And we also have information about the reactor system conditions in the report on the Idaho website so you can get the information. And Paul Demkowitz and I would be very glad to connect you with the reactor folks at Idaho to get these documents to you so that you can understand what we are looking at. I must mention quality assurance compliance. Our program with the gas reactor fuel program is under an NQA1 quality assurance regime. And you will see in our call that we would like to have more than just sort of notebooks. We would like to be able to have your data. You would acquire it at your facility and store it. And we would like to be able to put it up as qualified data on our nuclear data management and analysis system data. And the reason why we're doing this with this high level of quality assurance is because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission expects that. And so some of your key results should be able to be quality assured, and we will help you with that if you have not already done that with some of the other NEUP proposals. Some universities may not be aware of the strict requirements for nuclear-related systems. So here's my email address, and Dr. Paul Demkowitz is heading up the TRISO fuel program at the Idaho National Laboratory. If we need to get you a sample from Oak Ridge, we can make sure we get a hold of John Hunn for you. Again, we are not allowed to receive white papers, abstracts, give you an okay, yes, this sounds great. If you were to email me something like that, I would have to say, no, please go back and look at the solicitation. But you could email me and Paul. We have our phone numbers listed on the NEUP website so that we could clarify information for you. But discussing your actual proposal is verboten at this point. So if possible, I would like to entertain any questions that you may have at this time. Does that mean I answered all the questions?
To segue into what Madeline was talking about, anything that is discussed with federal or technical program managers is going to be made publicly available on NEUP.gov as long as it doesn't have any it isn't proprietary in nature. And so, as Madeline said, please do not try to submit pre-applications to the technical program contact or to the federal program contacts. Those discussions are still appropriate, but it needs to be understood that as much of those conversations that can be disclosed will be disclosed in an open format on NEUP.gov.
Just so you know, folks, the other important thing to do is if you have a hard time going through the Idaho or Oak Ridge websites, getting reports, we can help you. But you can also go on to the Office of Science and Technical Information, which is down at Oak Ridge, OSTI, OSTI.gov, and what that can do for you, you can actually do really good searches. So you may also be able to find data from other experiments out there as well to benchmark. I mention that because all of our reports for the TRISO fuel work are not only on the Idaho and Oak Ridge websites, and all of the Oak Ridge ones go automatically to Idaho as well. We also put them up on OSTI.gov, OSTI.gov. So we can do a search and help you find this information if you need it, or direct you to published papers so that you don't replicate any other tests that we've already had performed over the last 12 years.
Okay, the first question. I plan to lead a 2 universities combined team where there will be able to test irradiated items in the university facility. Do I need to submit some sort of pre-proposal, or can I submit the final proposal by January 23rd?
I would suggest that you, because we are under the program supporting area, they are due January 23rd. You are not asking for this as part of NSUF, and our paragraph does not appear in the NSUF 1 or NSUF 2 category. Just so you know that. We had to choose one but not the other. So again, you may use and collaborate with another university. I think it's very important to realize that if University A says, well, we're the main proposal and the others are going to work with us, but we're going to do mostly computational stuff and we're going to do mostly modeling and we're not doing experiments, that's not going to bode very well. The experimental university should put in the application and have University A as a support organization to help with the correlations. You may come up with correlations or some first principle ways of modeling this, but we would like to have this information available to be able to be put into our integral codes, namely parfum and the moose bison calculations at Idaho. I hope I answered your question.
Okay. Can one get surrogate materials without radioactive core for funded projects, and from where could they get them?
Okay, that is a great question. We do have zirconium beads that have been coated. They are at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. We also have depleted uranium coated TRISO particles. We also have matrix blanks as well. So Dr. Paul Demkowitz and I will be able to work with you to get those materials.
Okay, what level of neutron flux is needed for adequate irradiation of TRISO particles?
Our particles have been, in the first test, were irradiated up to 19% FEMA. That's fissions, initial metal atoms. So it's about, it's almost to the end. It's almost equivalent to 200 gigawatt days per metric ton, but you can tell our particles are not metric ton size. So you would need to have a soft flux. It's very thermalized in a gas-cooled reactor. And then the TRIGA reactor, it might take 4 years. So that's why it may not work very well. But we do have irradiated materials, and we can irradiate or irradiate them to get the fission products to reactivate them. So that can be done in a TRIGA. So if it's been irradiated before and we want to have more fission products, it could be put in a capsule and irradiated in your TRIGA reactor. But again, you would have to have a hot cell facility to handle these things. So small amounts of irradiation, let's say 3 months in a TRIGA reactor. I have experience working at Penn State with that TRIGA reactor, by the way, and others across the complex. You wouldn't really get more than 1% FEMA, F-I-M-A, and that really does not provide sufficient information. Because what we are looking at is once we irradiate the silicon carbide layer and the pyrolytic carbon layers, they are very much damaged. They're up to about 5 to 10% DPA. So we would have to have a very long time in the TRIGA reactor to do that.
Okay.
But we can provide materials if necessary.
Will the TRISO specimens from National Labs be free of charge?
If it's, we would only ship a very small amount we would, there is a cost involved, especially if they're irradiated particles. You may want to contact Dr. Paul Demkowitz. If there's a small fee, there would be no problem. If it's, if you want a big container of these, we're going to have to use your grant to do it. So we're going to have to do that on a case-by-case basis. Shipping the surrogate material, like for instance, the zirconium beads that are coated, it's basically a FedEx box, so it's no big deal.
Okay, if one works with a surrogate material without radioactive core for this study, then can it be done on unirradiated samples?
Oh, yes. Yes, in fact, that's what we're intending. If you use a zirconium-coated bead and you have this and a matrix, let's say you put it inside a matrix sleeve, a few of these, then you could measure the attack of the matrix under the water conditions and see how far it penetrates in terms of times and temperatures, and then how much damage has happened. We also have irradiated zirconium beads in HYFER, so we do have some highly irradiated material that is non-fueled, so that you have the damage of the coatings already there without having the pain of having a radioactive source in terms of fuel.
Okay, those are all the questions we have, Madeline. Thank you for being on here and answering questions.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. And Paul, Dr. Demkowitz, and I will work with you to see what type of materials you may need to get. Thank you.